Today on the Bourbon Bites podcast, I'm reviewing Old Forester Barrel Strength Rye and giving you some tips on how to get your friends into whiskey. Hello everyone and welcome to the Bourbon Bites podcast. I'm your host Clifton, and today I thought I would start us off with a rye review because I haven't had much rye whiskey on the podcast in a while. So don't know why that is. I love rye whiskey, so I'm getting into the sample of Old Forester Single Barrel Strength Rye. This comes from a listener of the show, Steve Burkow. Gave me the sample from his bottle. This is 126.9 proof. I don't believe these are picks. As far as I know, I don't think they've done pick versions of the single barrel rye. I have yet to actually see a bottle in real life. These were super limited. I feel like the barrel proof bourbon was a lot easier to find. I've gotten a couple bottles of that, but the rye, I've practically just never seen it. I think I saw it one time marked up to like 150, but I think MSRP on this is supposed to be around 80. So I'm definitely not going to pay that, especially without trying it, but I figured I will get into this sample for this review. So this is a limited release, even more so than the bourbon. I know that they really knocked it out of the park with their just regular Old Forester rye. That one comes in at 100 proof, very, very affordable, like $22, I think. So this is stepping up a notch. It is single barrel and it is barrel proof. So 126.9. That's really, I mean, for a rye whiskey, typically those come in at lower proof, even at barrel strength. So I'm really excited to try this. This is their same rye mash bill, supposedly, as their Old Forester rye. So 65% rye, 20% malted barley, and 15% corn. So it's about a mid-range rye. It's definitely not high rye, but also not like barely legal rye either. So I'm really excited to see how this presents itself at this high proof. Let's go and get it poured. Hopefully you guys have had a great week and you're going into a fantastic weekend. I know here in Southern California, it's going to be in the 80s. It's going to be really nice. I'm hoping I can get out to go to the beach. I realize that it's Super Bowl weekend. Most people have plans for that. Especially me being in Los Angeles, I have no plans. I have no interest in either team. Of course, I would like, obviously LA to win, but I don't know. I just have not really followed it too much. Not that I ever really do. Sometimes I've been more interested in it than previous years, but this year I really just don't care. Like, I'm sorry if you don't unsubscribe to my podcast because I don't like football, but my family was never like a football or even sports family in general. I think the only sports games I ever went to growing up were like ice hockey with my Boy Scout troop. But yeah, so just not really ever into football. I do like watching the halftime performances, and the commercials, of course, are always a ton of fun. But I don't know. I'm not a big Super Bowl guy. But maybe you guys do have big plans and you're going to a party this weekend. It's kind of why I had this concept for this stream to do a how to get your friends into whiskey stream, because I know a lot of people are going to either have people over or going to a friend's house. They want to bring some bottles, but they know their friends, they just do shots or they just do cocktails. So later in this episode, I'm going to give you some tips on how to help encourage your friends to drink whiskey. But for now, let's go and give this Old Forester Rye Single Barrel Proof a nose. Oh wow, that's really intense on the nose. I wasn't expecting it to be so powerful. I don't know why not, because it's obviously barrel strength, but it's really, I guess, complex on the nose. It starts off with like an oaky kind of aspect to it. Now, I don't know the age on this. I know it's probably relatively young. I know the bourbon was relatively young. But yeah, I'm surprised by how much oak is the first thing I'm smelling, especially on a rye whiskey. There's a lot of sweetness there as well. I feel like there's like a brown sugar kind of note that's kind of lingering at the top forefront of the nose of this. There's a little bit of like a graininess. You can not necessarily tell that it's a rye whiskey, but it's not, it doesn't smell young, I would say. I think it smells complex, and I just can't wait to get into it. So let's go and give it a taste. Cheers, guys. Ooh, that is nice. I really am such a fan of rye whiskey. I feel like it doesn't get enough love in the whiskey world. But when done right at high proof, it's just a delicious, delicious pour. I mean, this one, I actually had a sip of it a couple weeks ago when I first got this, and I wasn't super impressed with it, but I'm glad that I revisited it today because I'm really loving the taste on this one. It drinks a lot more like a rye whiskey than it smells, but it's not necessarily grassy or minty in that way, or dill, as some people would say. To me, it's just like a really grain-forward but bold flavor. It has like a sweet, like kind of like a bubblegum kind of note that lingers like mid-palate. And it doesn't, any of the youth that I was getting off of the nose of this, I'm definitely not getting on the palate. I think it drinks like a very nicely aged rye whiskey, and I see why the demand for this is so high. This is really impressing me more than the single barrel proof bourbon did from Old Forester. I'm reminded of all the things I love about the Old Forester regular 100 proof rye, but this is definitely amped up to 126.9. I think that this drinks like an $80 rye whiskey. I could see people paying up to $100 for it. I could see myself doing that. Like I said, I saw it once in the store for about $150. I think that's a little more than I would pay for it. But I do think this drinks like a really nice high-end rye whiskey, and absolutely worth $80 if you see it. So thank you again, Steve, for letting me have the sample. If you guys ever want me to review something on the show, whether it's for the podcast or my live streams, you can send me an email, contact@bourbonbites.com. I'll send you my mailing info. I would love to do more viewer sent samples. I'm kind of going through my backlog of ones that I've had for literal years at this point, but it's starting to get a little low. So if you guys are ever interested in sending me something and hearing my thoughts on it, or if you want to send me a blind flight for a stream, that would be a ton of fun. I would absolutely love to do it. So let me know if you are interested. All right, well, if you guys are ready to get into it, I want to give you some tips on helping your friends get into whiskey. So if you're like me, not all of your friends are alcoholics, let's be real. No, but for real, a lot of my friends, they do, of course, drink cocktails and, drink beer, but very few of them outside of, Whiskey Tube or my local whiskey group actually drink whiskey. So I thought I would come up with a little bit of a guide that will help you help them get into whiskey, if they want to, of course. I guess that's the number one rule. If they're not even remotely interested in getting into whiskey, don't force that on them. Don't make that ruin your relationship. Don't be like, you can only be my friend if you can bottle chug some Blantons. I mean, but seriously, if they are interested in learning, help them out, but ease them into it. I think one of the things that's easy to do for us, because we're so passionate about whiskey, is to kind of overcomplicate it and have way too much information that you're throwing at them. They don't need to know the mash bill of the whiskey you're giving them. They don't need to know, if it's non-chill filtered or anything like that. I think keeping it simple is the best way to make it approachable, because if you make it sound like something that they're never going to understand, they're going to lose interest very, very quickly. So don't give them too much info. And in the same, I guess, vein as that, don't overwhelm them with bottles. I mean, it's so easy for us to be like, oh, try this. Oh, you got to try this. But if there's someone that's new to whiskey, they may not be used to having more than one or two drinks, especially in a short period of time. So you want them to remember the experience, right? So you don't want to get them completely drunk where they don't remember a thing. So just take it easy with the info and the bottles you give them. And most importantly, just be patient with them. Be open, drink along with them. Don't make it seem like you're watching them, observing them. Just make it, approachable and easy. And if they don't like something, it doesn't mean that they'll never like it. Not that you should, keep trying to force them to. It just means, maybe not then, they're not ready for it, or they're just not in the right mindset to start getting into whiskey. But if you do have someone that is willing to learn, I do have some tips that I think might help you help them get into whiskey. I think the most important thing is to find out what kind of drinker they are. Are they someone that just does shots? Are they someone that typically sips cocktails? Or do they already, kind of sip whiskey or sip something neat? And I think there's kind of a different approach depending on where they are in their alcohol journey. So for your friends that are mostly into just taking shots, or, that they only really drink beer, I think the most important thing is to kind of tell them, how to drink whiskey. I think a lot of people will typically just throw it back because that's kind of how they see it done in movies and stuff. But really diving into, I guess, the art of sipping, one of the things that often turns people away from drinking whiskey neat is they just don't like the burn. So you have to really ease them into it. What I like to tell my friends to do is the very first sip, just take a little bit and just touch it on the tip of your tongue and then just swallow it. Don't think about flavors. You got to get them used to that higher proof. Now I'm not saying give them a barrel proof bourbon. Definitely don't. Definitely stick to, the 80, under 90 proof for their first one if they're not used to sipping anything neat. They're normally just used to doing shots. For them, a shot is 80 proof or less, normally when you're mixing in other things, and usually they struggle with those. So really you want to make it approachable, like I said in the beginning. So give them a lower proof whiskey, let them just get adapted to the proof, and then, teach them about, the, Kentucky chew, having it sit in your mouth, chewing it a bit, and just get them used to not just swallowing it immediately, because I think that's what a lot of people that are, people that drink shots, that's kind of how they typically drink alcohol. They're not used to sipping on it and enjoying the flavors. So once you teach them about that, you can start asking them questions, ask them if they get any flavors off of it. Now, be prepared. Their first note they're probably going to tell you is, wow, that's smooth. Which I know we all cringe at, but again, they're basing it off of what they've heard. They hear people talk about whiskey being smooth, so they're going to say, oh, that's smooth. And really, that's just their way of saying, hey, that didn't burn that time, or didn't burn as much as I expected. So that's already a good start. Even though it sounds a bit cringy for those of us that are whiskey drinkers, it's off to a good start. So once you get past that, maybe kind of throw out a couple flavor ideas, typical, vanilla, caramel, if they're drinking like a bourbon or something, and kind of explain to them, like, it's not that you actually taste these tasting notes, you just kind of are reminded of them. You try to place like, oh, what does that taste like? That tastes like something I've had before. And a lot of times you realize, oh, that's, a piece of chocolate cake or a piece of caramel candy. I think that's the easiest way to explain it. And along with that, let them know there's no wrong answers. You don't want them to feel like, oh, you're putting them on the spot and, they're going to say something wrong. Because, let's be real, it's all personal. Your tasting notes are your own. We like to share them on podcasts and WhiskeyTube just to kind of find something that's maybe familiar with our listeners. But it's all subjective. So I think you should just encourage them to, speak their mind, tell you what they're tasting, even if it's like bubble gum, like I got on this Old Forester Rye earlier. It's always good to be encouraging them and kind of playing off of that. If they give you a certain note, be like, oh, yeah, I didn't give it like that, but I got it like this, which is kind of similar. So I totally see why you got that, So next up, maybe your friends that, maybe are beyond their shot stage of alcohol and they do enjoy really good craft cocktails. Well, these I think are the easiest people to get into whiskey. I have a couple friends that's kind of their territory is cocktails, and you can easily ease people into sipping whiskey through whiskey spirit forward cocktails. One of my favorites is an old fashioned. Super simple cocktail to make, but a lot of times bars and restaurants really screw it up. So they may never have had a legit, like, good old fashioned. So if you know they like cocktails, make them an old fashioned using, one of your favorite whiskeys. Again, nothing super high proof that's going to turn them away from it because they're not going to be used to that. But yeah, I think a good old fashioned is the gateway into sipping whiskey neat. Then once they have an old fashioned and you realize they like it, then maybe just pour them a whiskey on the rocks. It's going to be not as sweet as their old fashioned and they're used to, but then you can kind of go back towards the flavor notes. Like, what are you tasting with this? Is it sweet? Is it savory? Is it oaky? I don't think there's anything wrong with starting them out with whiskey on the rocks if they are a cocktail person. They're used to the cold experience. They're used to the act of sipping a cocktail glass. I think that's going to be very familiar to them and it's not going to scare them off. Lastly, let's say there's someone that is somewhat of a sipper. They enjoy their Jameson or their Jack Daniels or their Macallan, depending on, what they like. But someone that is just wants to explore more whiskey but has very, very limited experience. These are my favorite people to try to get into different whiskeys because they're already kind of got a head start. So the first thing that it's important to know is to find out what they like. If they are a Jameson person, I think you should still stick in that territory, especially at the beginning. So maybe pick something from the same category. Like let's stick with the Jameson example. Pick, maybe a red breast, maybe a little bit higher end, maybe a little bit higher proof, and let them try that and gauge their reaction. If it's something that they know they like and that you're kind of elevating it a bit, that's going to be the aha moment for them. Like, wait, it can get better than, my standard whiskey that I drink, at home. That's what you want. You want them to taste familiar, but like a step above. So once you got that, maybe give them a flight of different similar whiskeys. Now, I'm not saying stick exclusively to the type of whiskey that they like, which, you can, but I think it'd be fun to, give them a flight, give them like one or two other Irish whiskeys, if they're a Jameson drinker, but maybe throw in, a single malt or even, like a low proof bourbon, maybe they just haven't had a good bourbon yet. So you can really go off of that, but keep it very, very tame at first. You'll get a clearer picture of what they actually enjoy. And that way you don't completely like scare them off with, a peated whiskey if they're a Jameson drinker. Like, please don't do that. And then take it from there. I think everyone has their own journey when it comes to whiskey or alcohol. And, if you have someone that, like yourself, if you listen to this podcast, I assume you're at least remotely interested in whiskey. You might just be here for the video games. That's cool too. But still, having someone like that that's passionate about something, as long as you don't go like completely nerding out, I think if they're really interested in learning about whiskey, they're going to really appreciate having you as a friend. And just keep it going. Not necessarily have to have bourbon tastings with them every night, but maybe, if let's say they're a coworker, maybe give them samples, obviously not on the clock, but just constantly just give them new things to try. Or if you're at a bar, buy them a pour of something you think they'll like. I think keeping it engaging and keeping it fun is the best part. You don't want it to seem like, a chore. You don't want to make it seem like a class. Yes, it's educational, but you don't want them to feel like they're in school. You want them to feel like they're having fun, especially if there's someone that's just used to drinking at parties. Make it fun, have fun with it. Make it a game. Honestly, there's so many ways to have fun with it. And as long as you have someone that's willing to learn and that wants to really get into it, I think you're going to have a fantastic time. But you know what? Let's say you don't have any luck. They just are not into it, or you don't have any friends that are interested in getting whiskey. Don't worry. Just move on. Let it go. But there's so many ways to meet other people that are into whiskey, especially if you don't really have a local group. Search on Facebook. I mean, that's how I found a lot of local whiskey groups. Just search for, your town whiskey club or whiskey society. Surely there's hopefully, I mean, I don't know the whole country, but hopefully there's something nearby to you, even if it's something that, is a little bit out of the way, but you can make the occasional trip to their, meetups and their tasting events, all that stuff. Better yet, if you have a local distillery, just hang out at their bar every now and then. Go to their special releases. You're bound to meet whiskey folks. One thing about whiskey drinkers is we love the company and we love sharing whiskey. I mean, hopefully most people are like that. That's how I am. I love sharing bottles. I love getting friends to try new things. So this community is very welcoming. Even if you're a newbie, just reach out. Let them know you're new, but you want to learn, and trust me, we'll take good care of you. And let's say there's nothing available in your area, and you searched, you can't find any local whiskey groups, there's no distilleries, there's not even a good bourbon bar in your area. Don't worry. This is exactly why my good friend Vadim put together the Virtual Tasting Society. He actually started it during COVID when people couldn't gather in person, but what he does is put together these sample kits and sends it, around the country. Anywhere in the U.S. can order them. And then you get to actually attend a Zoom tasting with brand reps, master distillers, all these incredible guests from the whiskey industry. And you get to do like a Q&A with them. You get to hear them talk about the whiskeys. Whether you're a beginner or someone that's super into whiskey like me, I always love those. So if you are interested in that, go to virtualtastingsociety.com. It'll redirect you to their Eventbrite page. Give them a follow. They're always posting new events. I think it's every week. They do 1 or 2 a week. So make sure you're following them. And if you ever see something that interests you, sign up. If you're local to the Southern California area like I am, they do have local pickup spots around the area. So you can save a little bit of money. But if you are, let's say you're in Florida, you can sign up and have it shipped to you. So really cool if you don't really have a local group, or if you just prefer to drink at home. Definitely check it out, virtualtastingsociety.com. Make sure to let them know that I sent you. Not sponsored or anything, but he's just a good friend of mine, and he's really passionate about putting these virtual tastings together, so go give him a follow. But that does it for this week's episode. Hopefully you learned some things about ways to get people into whiskey. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to introduce friends to new whiskey, and hopefully introduce you guys by listening along to new things that you may not have had a chance to try yet. So if you want to be the first to know about the latest things I'm reviewing, you can join at patreon.com/bourbonbites. For as little as $2 a month, you get early access to all of my reviews. You get to vote in polls that influence my live streams. And if you are the higher tiers, you get access to things like our monthly hangout, our after party hangout, and the Bourbon Bites subscription box, where I send you whiskey samples every single month, and we'll do a small group tasting to taste them, whether they're blind or there's like a theme. If that piques your interest, that is the $50 tier, but you get access to all the other hangouts and other benefits of the lower tiers. I've been doing that with our friend Todd Cooper, and we've been having an absolute blast. I always look forward to those monthly tastings. But thank y'all so much for listening. This has been Bourbon Bites. Cheers, and I'll talk to you next episode.